I'll try to keep this session as enjoyable as possible. And when I'm saying that is that this is really something I work with. I think is one of the really missing pieces and is very interesting. I'm calling the session the building blocks of good detection and response services for the ICS environment. This is not because it's it's not technical session. It might be thinking about that, and especially after a good presentation from Vladimir on MDR. What I will talk about is more like what do you need in the organization to be ready for the incident. And I'm not talking about technical stuff only, because in my about 20 years working in this area, I've seen a lot of incidents. I've been incident responder and so on. And one of the things that is really important when it hits you is actually how can you minimize the time to get it up and running again. And one of those is what we are going to talk about, and that is how can the organization actually help doing this so we make the technical guys as efficient as possible. So when I'm talking about that, now we're in Sochi, so I found this picture because, hey, what is more local than this in the World Championship in football? It doesn't have to be that, but what we can learn from here is to see what is the organization behind these Olympic or VM or athletics, who's sports people out there. And what can we learn from that? We can learn that they have a great organization behind them, so that supports them, who helps them doing this, and this is something we need to be better at. How can the organization help the technical people, and the technical people help the organization? So this is what I'm kind of founding it around, to actually understand the link between the organization and the detection or MDR team or CERT team or SOC or whatever you call it, is very important. So when I'm talking about this, I talk first of all about leadership. Leadership is very important because you need to help the people, you need to engage the people to actually do this. And one of the things we are talking about is how is the communication between the leaders and the techie guys sitting on and helping to come over this attack or be prepared. We can do it from the organization side. How can we be prepared to actually do as best we can to help the techies? So what I call have two areas, I call the leader and the members of the team, that's our technical people. What I normally say that the team needs some leaders, it doesn't need manager. What do I mean about that? I mean that the leaders or directors doing this needs to be aligned with organization strategy, honestly. And why I say honestly is because I've seen a lot of leaders just accepting the strategy. We need to be able to build a strategy and actually follow it with our stomach, so we actually are aligned with the business strategy and communicate that to the team so they can understand it, of course, in an overview and in an engaging way. So understanding the people's value, when I'm talking about the people here, I talk about the techie people or the team leader or something like that, because we need to understand what are their values. We also need to understand what are our board or our security group's values. And what I talk about here is because helping this alignment and engaging, using the values in people is actually the way a lot of leaders, when we talk about creating what we call a hypo team or high-performance team. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with ICS. It's all about leadership. So this is what I call practice as you preach. As a manager or leader or both, basically, you actually need to practice is what you're saying. Building relationship is one of the topics there is actually do what you say. Again, practice as you preach is very important. So when building the team, getting engaged of them, investing in the people's values, and actually going further and say, how can I, as a leader, engage the team so they are allowed or actually feel that they are in part of developing where we are going in this ICS environment for the secure purposes. One of the things that I've seen a lot missing and misinterpretation is strategies. So what is a strategy actually? A lot of people have talked about strategy for this year, and they say that's not a strategy. A strategy is a long-term aim to reach a bigger goal. Yes, you have it in 1 year, but that's your 1-year plan. So be aware that when you are planning a strategy for the ICS team, you need to think ahead, but you also need to think what is the short-term and what is the long-term perspective of this strategy. So that's what I call planning the future or making a good cyber strategy in the ICS detection and response services. One of the important things here as the incident manager or incident director or the leader of the team is actually the stakeholder mapping. I'm just taking some of it with me, but this is some 4 areas that is very important. So actually building relationships with the stakeholders before the attack is important. I'll come back to why. But one of those is, if you have some legislation, sorry, I mentioned it, is auditors. How can you communicate, build relationship with the people auditing you? How can you build relationship with the staff? And here, sitting in a kind of detection and response team, you need to be quite good relationship with the plant manager. Because if something happens, you would really like to have an understanding on that, or him or her understanding of what they are thinking. Then we have the value chain. We mentioned that, it has been mentioned before today. This is not only on the product side, but it can also, who is coming in and helping, coding different stuff? Is they coming with their laptops? Understanding the supply chain in this one is very important. A lot of attacks is actually, the last one I heard was actually because a consultant organization was actually taking his laptop and connecting it to the production network. And there you are, you had the malware. Okay? Then I put up threats. What do I mean about that? You need in the organization to manage threats as a kind of a virtual stakeholder. So how can we do that? One of the things is very important is the threat intelligence. But the threat intelligence, you need to, whenever you buy it or produce it internally or what you're doing, you need always to focus that you have a management language in it, not only a technical language. And when I call it management language, that's kind of a normal human language. Because I'm coming from technical, but I've seen when I'm reading reports and you have 20 applications, you're like a lot of different stuff, and you're not telling what it is they're telling. That's a problem. So actually, be able to manage threats as a stakeholder is a valuable thing when something happens. So all this is pre-accident I'm talking about. Probably one of the most important one here is what I call the priority slider. I'll give you an example. You need to define in the organization what is more important than other things, what is most critical. And a slider is a good thing, but just remember one thing, none of them needs to have equal values. This is not an easy task, but it helps a lot. I was in quite as incident responder in Stuxnet's time, feel very old now, but then we were actually waiting a long time for the organization to prioritize this HMI, is that more important than this one? And that expand your time to repair. So that's time is going. So setting the team, I would say, is depending on your organization's maturity. It's depending on the size of the organization. I really like when I'm doing getting it up to what I call the intelligence. This is SANS structure. So why is that? Because the intelligence is so much more than technical stuff. This is actually how we can see how things move, how we can be prepared. A lot of business people, it's like using it all the day. We just call it business intelligence. Now we're just talking about the different stuff. This is really important, and actually where you want to put yourself is depending on your organization maturity, the size of the organization. I really recommend intelligence, or if you are smaller or not as mature, start with the active defense. So, what is these events and why those are important? Event structure is critical. So think of it of when something happens, you can define this as 3 steps. What is it called? Crisis, incident, and an event. A crisis is where you have human problems. People die, you need to go to the hospital. Or there is a chance that the company get bankruptcy because of this cyber attack. We saw it later before that CEOs get fired because of cyber attacks. This is something what I will call a crisis. An event or incident is more like it can have some big impact, but not in that size. So when you actually build your preparedness plan, you actually need to map it to the different types. And the incident manager or director needs to understand what is he or she allowed to do in this kind of situation. All this needs to be in front. So you don't need to go to the upper management to ask, what can I do? No, we have an incident. We know this is the plan. We have a crisis. This is the plan. So you know what you're allowed to do and how you can work. There's a lot of planning, but it helps when you're coming there. I've seen it several times. I don't want to talk too much into how you set up the team, but the manager or the director is depending on the size of your organization often. So you can say incident director could be kind of a CISO, reporting to upper management, and then have the incident manager below. This is for larger organization. But sometimes you don't have that structure. So you have the incident manager is more like the guy or girl that actually managed the team on daily basis, but also is there when the incident happens. So in that case, it's really important that when an attack happens, this is a high stress area for the people in the team. So I'll come back to it. You need to block them and what I'm calling empower them. I'll come back to them in 2 seconds and tell you. But first, just some fast, short things, pitfalls. We don't want the doers. We want the people who actually test the things they do. I've seen a historian outage for 2 weeks because of a fast patching. So that's what I call it. The doers is not really good. We want the people that can structure. We want the people that test before, the people that ask for questions. We're actually starting more analytic people than normal IT. And not because I want to kick on normal IT, it's just different people, just different sets. So this is one of the big differences and can have problems. So what I mean by empower the team, when you are in an incident or a crisis, you have an attack, the manager or the director's one responsibility is actually taking the normal structure and put it upside down. You can say that the manager now need to screen his team and saying that the CEO or the other director are not allowed to communicate directly with the techies. They need to go through the manager or the director. Why is that? I think everybody has been working on something really complex. Somebody comes in and says something to you, and it takes a long time to get back. This is one of the things. So please do that. Make a structure that as an incident director or manager, every day at a certain time, you report to the security group to inform what is happening. Not more than 2 times a day. Once is recommended. A lot of different structures can be made. So do you have outside people coming in as outsourcing? Or is it only your own staff? There's good and bad things about it, because getting outsourced, you often have higher knowledge in sometimes. And they have hopefully more experience in attacks. But please ask them not about the CV and how long they have been working in this, but their experience, how many hours a month are they actually working with specific things. And then you will actually get a quite different answer than you see on a normal CV. And you get the people that actually know something. Another thing about consultants, I love it, have been there. So I know they have, some of them is really good, but they don't have the understanding of your organization. So in the detection and response, I always recommend having people, the same people be there, and then you can schedule it so they only have their certain amount of hours, but you don't have different people coming in and out, because that just increases the complexity. Can I actually go in and say, how can I structure this one? What I've seen in the last year and a half around the world is like, you're starting structuring this as different locations. So let's say that the subject matter expert actually sitting in the plant structure, but is actually tied into the detection and response team. So for coming from a technical perspective, you say this is difficult to manage. But from a relationship and a stakeholder, it's great because you know what the business units actually need. So doing a rotation in this one could actually be a great benefit of it, because you keep the expertise and you keep the relationship higher. And the relationship is very important when the hit happens, because then you should be in good standing with these stakeholders, especially the strong one. To make it, easy to define roles. Not easy because nothing is easy here, but there is a model called RACI. There's a lot of different models to control who is doing what, who is responsible for what. But this is very simple, and just writing down 4, 5 lines of what the different is doing. That is something a lot of people can understand. Who needs to be informed in a crisis? Who is controlling the flag in the crisis, right? So that's just a small one. Incident response plans. This is more like a sum up, but coming a bit new. Why do I think that is important? You need to be ready for the event. So all this is actually things we need to do before the event. And why? Because we want to shorten the time to fix. So we need to be ready in the organization, right? So regulation and rules. Yes, every country almost have some regulations and rules on cyber, on not cyber. We need to be aware of them. We need to find out how do we control or how do we work with them. I'm not talking about compliance stuff. I'm talking about what is there, what can we do. Agreements, this is what I was talking about. Agreements is actually telling what do I have as an incident manager when a crisis happens. What are my role? What can I do when something else is happening? This is important. That's the agreement. Easy to understand. This is actually something very important. We have a preparedness plan. Let's say it's 20, 30 pages. You need to have a 10-minute read of that. Because when the consultant's coming in, or when your technical comes in, they need to max use 10 minutes to get a fast grasp of what the roles are, what the problems are, not the problem, what is actually agreed in this one, and it needs to be easy to understand, because we are not able to use half an hour to read your response plan when we are doing incident response. So roles, know your people, know your consultants, contact information, who can I pull in if there's crisis management or capacity management areas, what are priority and stakeholders, talked about those, a clear communication, and this is you need to upper management have a clear understanding what you can do and what you cannot do in different situations. The proactive services is very important, training, audits, and so on. I haven't been talking much about technology because I think the human and the processes here is critical. Not because this is more important than the technical stuff, because this is missing almost every place I'm out and talk to management and organizations. So this is very, very important. I can see my time is up. On my last slide here is what I call the building block. Why that? that's just to tell you what is the kind of 5 different top things we need to be ready from the organizational side and how we can support the team. I normally say, when I'm doing advice out there, say the manager in a crisis, he's the mother of the team. He comes with Cokes, or Coca-Cola, he comes with pizza, he comes with sweets, and he tells people, now you go home and sleep because you're not efficient anymore. And in normal, you then swap it, right? As we know, they have the normal structure. That was basically it from me. So I hope that it has some interest. And if I don't know if there's time for questions. Oh yeah, I get a thumbs up. So please, that, or else I will also be here tonight and tomorrow.